Thank you. Colleagues, welcome to our seminar for today. My name is Kgorong, and I'll be the facilitator for the day. If I can kindly request all of us to maybe put our phones on silence so that there are no disturbances. I will ask Prof. Huno to do the welcome remarks and purpose of the seminar for us. Prof. Huno.
Dumelang colleagues, le kae? Re teng. It's Women's Month. We all know that in 1956 we had a huge group of women from all walks of life standing up for women, for South African women, on the 9th of August. As a result of that courage, we now celebrate this whole month as Women's Month. So what does it mean to celebrate women in this country at this point, at this moment? It means that we pause. It means that we pause and we interrogate. What does it mean to be a woman in this country at this point? Unfortunately, when you do that pause, it becomes apparent that there's still a lot that needs to happen because women still experience a lot of challenges. So if you look at statistics, if you look at university entry statistics, for example, it shows that a large number of women apply and enter universities. It also shows that a large number of women come out of universities with degrees as compared to men. But when you look at the workplace, the picture changes. The picture changes with regards to who is in leadership. The picture changes with regards to who earns more. What happens? What happens? That's the question. So when you pause to reflect on what it means to be a woman in South Africa today, you realize that there's a lot that still needs to be done. The pay gap, the gender pay gap is a big issue. Why is it a big issue? It's a big issue because research shows that when women earn an income, the income goes to the family. The income is for everyone else. So when women don't earn, or when women earn less, it's not a woman's problem, it's a community problem, it's a social problem. So when we do this pause, it becomes apparent, colleagues, that there's a long way to go. So we are doing this pause today to reflect on the experiences of young women leaders, not only in the higher education sector, but in the country in general. And we do this from the Transformation Office at Unisa. Our work is aligned to asking the hard questions around transformation, around who publishes, around which knowledges are provided space, which publishers we publish with, and what those publishers acknowledge as knowledge. We ask transformative questions around who is employed, in which positions, and what impact does that have on how we teach, what we teach, how we lead, and the challenges that we bring forth as we embody certain ways of being in the world. So we come to this reflection, to this pause, as the transformation space at Unisa. And I think Meba Dumisile will introduce our two speakers who will speak on what it means to be a woman leader in South Africa, a young woman leader in South Africa today. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate that you are here with us, and we also hope that as we finish this seminar, that these reflections will continue for the rest of the month. And these reflections should not only continue in our one-on-one conversations, but they should continue as opinion pieces to newspapers, as articles in journal spaces, and as books, because these knowledges matter. Because one day all of us will not be here, but those who come after us should have these knowledges so that they can use them to navigate these unchanging spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Kuno, for welcoming us and for setting the tone for this seminar. I am sure, and I actually hope that all of us are ready to receive what our two speakers have for us today. I will then introduce the first speaker for today, Dr. Hlengiwe Ndlovu. I will read her bio. Okay. Dr. Hlengiwe Ndlovu is a strategist, a communication specialist, and a public policy specialist. She is a senior lecturer in governance and development at the Wits School of Governance, University of the Witwatersrand, where she lectures in security studies, gender and governance, and research methods and methodologies. As a gender scholar, policy analyst, and methodology specialist, Hlengiwe has conducted research for several local and international organizations, including government departments, NGOs, and NPOs, among other groupings. An industrial sociologist by training, Hlengiwe uses qualitative and quantitative analytical methods rooted in extended case methods, intersectional feminism, and participatory community research methodologies to understand and analyze contemporary complex social contexts. Hlengiwe holds a PhD in sociology, a master's in industrial sociology, a BA honors in industrial sociology, and a BA international relations, which are all from the University of the Witwatersrand. Her work experience spans across public, development, and academic sectors. Prior to joining the Wits School of Governance, Hlengiwe was a senior lecturer in the sociology department of the University of Free State. She completed a postdoctoral fellowship with the Center for Women and Gender Studies at Nelson Mandela University. She also completed another postdoctoral fellowship with the Center for Social Change in the University of Johannesburg, where she remains a research fellow. She has also worked for cutting-edge institutions such as the Public Affairs Research Institute, African Center for Migration and Society, and the South African Communist Party. Hlengiwe also has international teaching and research experience from institutions such as the Center of African Studies at Cambridge University, Eberhard Karl University of Tippenden in Germany, University of Lagos in Nigeria, and the Ibadan University also in Nigeria. Hlengiwe has a track record of publications in peer-reviewed journals, book chapters, and conference proceedings. She publishes on gender equality, local governance and democracy, and social movements, collective action, and change. She is also the co-auditor of Rioting and Writing, Diaries of the Wits, #4lists in 2017. Hlengiwe is also a seasoned political and policy analyst for local and international media. Her analysis has appeared on local channels such as the SABC, ETV, ENCA, Newsroom Africa, Business Day, The Sunday World, and the international newspapers such as The Washington Post, New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, Agence France Presse. This is French, but I read it in English, my apologies. I can't read French, but it's, that among other platforms. Her presentation title for today is Being Black and Women in the Academy, Reflections from the Picket Line. Colleagues, let us welcome Dr. Hlengiwe to actually share with us what she has today. And judging from her profile, Sizodla Sisutela, let us all embrace Dr. Dlamini. Sorry, Dr. Ndlovu.
Good morning, colleagues, and thank you so much, Batumile. I didn't think you were going to reach all that long. You know,
it deserved it.
things that happen when you ask people for their bios when they are busy, they just send whatever that was meant for something different. It's such a great honor to be here today, especially on this special Women's Month, because it's important that we continue, to keep the ball rolling, building on the sacrifices of other women that have come before us. So the title, Being Black and Woman in the Academy, it was chosen deliberately because when Professor Grace invited me to this talk, I remember that I shared a panel when I was starting my PhD that was titled the same, Being Black and Women in the Academy. I'm not sure if she still remembers, but that was in 2016. And then we had that conversation and the privilege for me to share that space with her, and then the reflections from the picket line really about a lot of lessons that are taken from the picket line itself, but more importantly from the Fismas Fall protests of 2015 to 2017. So if you are to ask me about the picket line of that particular time and in terms of what it means to reflect from the picket line today as a senior lecturer when I was just a PhD student by then, I'm trying to write a story of, although the Fismas Fall movement has been met with a lot of painful experiences and all, but what I'm writing today is a story of love from the picket line, a story of solidarity, a story of all positive lessons that I learned from the picket line and that still carry me today as a Black woman who is in the academy. So just a little bit on Fismas Fall and how I reflect on that. Obviously, here I'm reflecting on Fismas Fall from an activist herself, but also from the experiences of being in the movement while I was navigating two different spaces, on one hand as a student and on the other hand as a junior lecturer at Wits University during that time. How much time do I have?
You have about 40 minutes.
Oh, that's a lot. Okay. And so this is during the moment where I'm a Black woman within the movement. I'm a student who's protesting all the injustices, but also on the other hand, I'm a junior lecturer at the university. So this is between those two spaces, and here I'm reflecting on the work of women, both within the movement as students, but also within the movement as academics, and how those people continue to carry my academic journey today, and how that has impacted my own teaching today and my supervision of students. So I write somewhere in a different context, and I'm going to be reading just a few paragraphs. So this is me thinking through Fismas Fall and what it means in the process of decolonization and transformation, and what it means for me today as a Black woman in the academy. So the Fismas Fall campaign in South Africa embodied discourses of decolonization, decommodification and transformation through strategies, tactics, repertoires, and the very presence of the bodies on the picket line. The protests spoke to the history, the present, and the future in one moment through questioning, imagining, and reimagining an inclusive university system for an African child. It displayed beauty and pain, dismay and hope at the same time, through bodies of powerful and yet anxious young people who had had enough of structural violence and systemic racism that continues to exclude them from the higher education system. So if you ask me, who were the Fees Must Fall activists, or who are the Fees Must Fall activists, your response obviously is dependent on where you are standing in history and how you were reading the moment and how you continue to read the after effects of Fees Must Fall. But for me, while there are many identities imposed on Fees Must Fall activists, they've been understood and described themselves through their everyday lived experiences. These activists are products of broken families destroyed by the migrant labor system, hailing from black poor townships created by racist, segregationally exploitative apartheid system. They are from Soweto, Val, Lusikisiki, Ekofimvaba, Matatiele, Emataten, Vembe District, Alexander, and all other black broken townships and rural areas. As one of the contributors to the Diaries of the Wits, Fees Must Fall, Unonkululeko Mabaso, she describes them as, and I quote, hailing from a lineage of slaves, the fourth generation of landless people, born to low-class migrant workers, the sons and daughters of truck drivers and domestic workers. They were born free, yet they've been shackled by poverty and misfortune from the moment they breathed their first. And Neo Sambo describes them as an underclass of children who were born poor but rich in mind. And I argue that they've broken all barriers to qualify to study at the country's best universities. So the Fees Must Fall activists for me are daughters and sons of universities' outsourced cleaners and groundsmen that they stood with shoulder to shoulder during Fees Must Fall protest. They are a generation of young scholars whom, after 2 decades of democracy, are beginning to demystify the dream of a rainbow nation and to question the Eurocentric type of education system that denies them an opportunity to fully participate in the world economy as game changers, other than educated classes slaves. So this is my little reflection on what it meant to be within the Fees Must Fall movement, but also on how I identify myself, or I identified myself during that particular time, because there were so many challenges and sacrifices to be made from the picket line. But also, as I say, that this is me navigating 2 spaces. On one hand, you needed to be on the picket line to protest, but also on the other hand, you were expected to teach. And there were moments where academics were in solidarity with students, especially during the first wave of the Fees Must Fall protest during from October 2015. And then when we reached the peak of the Fees Must Fall, that was the march to the union buildings and the declaration of the 0% monetary increase, then there was a decline. And then in 2016, students came back and they asked hard questions around questions of outsourcing and what it meant to fight shoulder to shoulder with outsourced women who were cleaners, but also black men who were groundsmen and also cleaners at the university. But most importantly then, our students asked very difficult questions around the question of decolonization and transformation. That was in many ways unsettling and destabilizing the status quo that has always existed for the longest time ever. At my university during that particular time, the sociology department for the longest time has been perceived as one of the most progressive department, but during Fees Must Fall, or Fees Must Fall itself dispelled that myth when students started asking difficult conversations around questions of transformation and decolonization. Because then decolonization during that time meant that the very same curriculum that you taught Professor Grace Kuno at Wits whenever she started was not going to be the same thing that you were going to teach Hlengiwe when she came in 2010. Because that meant that the world has changed, it has evolved over and over again. We could not teach in 2014, in 2015, as if Marikana has not happened, as if many of the important events that have shaped the historical moments of South Africa have not happened. And, you would learn that in some of these spaces, some of the lecturers or academics were still comfortable, with maintaining the status quo and sitting, on top of their privilege. And what does that mean also in terms of questions of representation? Because when I came to Wits to start my PhD, or maybe let's say throughout my undergraduate degree, I never saw many black lecturers, especially women, in front of me teaching me. So taking up the academic project was not just by an accident, it was a conscious, deliberate and political choice, because it's only at an honors level where I could relate to one black academic who stood in front of me as a woman. But also this played a very important role during FISMA's fall, and I know Umbali Mazibuko had framed that as standing on the gap to say where the system is cracking and all of that, and there is no one who's standing on the gap. Black women have been found standing on that gap because for so many reasons, as students coming from very different, but also most importantly disadvantaged background from the township schools and all of that. We didn't have the culture and the repertoires to navigate the academic space, especially in a white institution like Wits. For instance, during lecture breaks, you will find that some other people, white kids, will go out, buy coffee, and then they come back to the room and have coffee with the lecturer. We never had that privilege. We never had that access, to our own educators. Even the language itself, the culture, was so difficult for some of us as black students coming from different background to navigate. So taking up an academic project, then becoming a political and conscious decision, but also most importantly during FISMA's fall, where during the time when students were protesting, we had a lot of lecturers who then insisted on running classes during the protests and what that meant, and then we started forming small groups to tutor or quote-unquote to mentor students who were undergraduates and also struggling academically and all of that. And that meant a lot really in terms of questions around leadership and representation and what it means to be black and a woman in the academy. One of the most important things that I learned during the FISMA's fall, and hence my reference to reflections from the picket line, was the whole concept of intersectionality. So although I had known the concept of intersectionality from the classroom for the first time, I saw it at play in terms of how we framed our struggles from the two paragraphs that I read, in terms of what it means, to be a FISMA's fall activist, but also beginning to see how these different socio-economic political factors structure different ways of inequality, and how then that forms different ways of resilience, both within the movement and within the academy as a system. As we moved on to navigate the space. But also, most importantly, the questions of gender and identity were very, very loud during FISMA's fall movement, because for the longest time we've known that the struggles of women and the struggles of the other marginalized groups are always relegated to the back. And that's why today I cannot begin to teach Steve Biko's Black Consciousness without teaching Steve Biko along Phumlaqola, where she actually critiques, the Black Consciousness movement and how it's in itself entrenched some of the gender inequalities that we're seeing today. So we saw a lot of that even within that broader movement, there were other movements within that movement. But also in terms of intersectionality, that came with realization of that the fact that we are both women does not necessarily translate to the fact that we share the same struggles, and I'll return back to some of these points later in my closing. But also, what was also interesting was to learn that as much as we live in a patriarchal society, and as much as we turned to, problematize gender inequality through the experiences of our encounters with men, but also Fismas Fall movement told me that actually women are also the facilitators of patriarchy. They are also, they have the power to actually keep it in check. So never mind the fact that at home, you have the mothers who then raise us in a patriarchal way, because obviously for the longest time they didn't have another choice. We were living in a patriarchal world, and they're the ones who are then keeping patriarchy in check and making sure that it continues through the way. But it was so loud during Fismas Fall, where different forms of identities really, mattered within that small space. And that was very interesting for me. But the lessons that I learned from that movement was to say it is possible to build an alternative space. And I always say to my students, I'm a product of kind supervision. I'm a product of kind mentorship. And those are some of the lessons that I learned from the picket line. So some of the black women who later on became very instrumental in my own academic career, I met them at the picket line during Fismas Fall, and we used the space to debate some of the issues, some of the challenges that we're facing, but also a moment of realizing that I'm not alone. There are other issues that are at stake. But then what does leadership mean for me? Within that particular space, then it means, what is your takeaway from the lessons from the picket line? What does it mean to be a product of kind supervision, of kind mentorship? This, for me personally, it meant that the first academic publication that I had, it came from the picket line. When I had said after the 4th of October, stripping off my top and protesting half naked, the journalists are beginning to get the stories forever. When I went to this other academic and say to Dr. Danai Muphoza, I'm so tired of responding to journalists around this issue, she said to me, write a paper, I will make it happen. And because that was my first academic journal article, she really made sure that she makes it happen, because what then followed that, she sent me a call on agenda, looking for special issue contributions, and then I started crafting this paper. I gave it to her, she gave it a first shot of reading, and then she said, I think it's going to fly, just send it, they will give you guidance. And then at the end of the journey, that paper then got published. But also some of the best international fellowships that I got while I was doing my PhD, whether I was going to write wherever, these were black women that I met at the picket line, and in terms of how they've mentored me. For instance, I did my PhD funded by NIHSS, and during that time, Professor Grace was also a mentor there, along Professor Spamandla Zondi, and the space in itself really understood the struggles of black students, the idea of that we do not have time at home to write and all of that because of the PhD. So the space that they created from their own personal experiences, and then putting it out there so that people like me can take advantage of that space and come up with something. That was one of the lessons for me. But then what does it mean? And I use an African feminist thought as an intervention to think through some of these things, to reflect on my own academic scholarship, but also on my own pedagogies. So I prefer the African feminist thought, and I use it with intersectional feminisms, and I put my S in brackets to recognize that these are different forms of feminisms, because they are not aspiring to the same thing. The base might be common, but the practices are actually different. And I did touch on the fact that I learned this the hardest way during Fismas Fall, that feminism in itself, even if it's black but it's still not the same. There were some forms and manifestations of feminism that were acceptable within the space, and there were others that were not acceptable. So in order for us to find a collective and common ground, it is important that we recognize that diversity and accept that we are going to do things differently because of the different backgrounds and different cultures where we come from. And this is the reason why I have problems with the argument that culture is oppressive. Instead, people will use culture to oppress people because people practice their cultures very consciously, and it means one or two things to them that as an outsider I may not necessarily understand, and then I can misconstrue some of those facts and then end up projecting my own feminism as the one that carries the weight, as the one that is superior more than the other. So borrowing from Walter Mignolo's work on the geopolitics of knowledge and knowledge production, I think this is now coming to the lessons that I learned from the picket line and what it means. For the longest time, women have been marginalized from the space, both as physically as human beings, but also in terms of knowledge and knowledge production, in terms of what counts as knowledge or what counts as knowledge production. That's why you'll see in most cases, for the longest time in history, anonymous is a woman. When they put a quote and then they say anonymous, you'll find that it is a quote that is coming from women. So how does that then help me in my own teaching today is the exercise of recentering, women's voices in my own teaching. And I always joke about this when I take students in for supervision. The school that I work for is very heavy in terms of supervision. So I always joke about I don't supervise men, and they ask me, why don't you supervise men? And I say, I realize the labor that goes into supervision, it is a labor of love, and it has to remain a labor of love. So sometimes we play that space of supervision because you are projecting your own struggles during your own PhD journey, during your own master's journey, or during your own academic journey, and you're wanting, having learned from the FISMA small space, you are wanting the better, for the next generation of scholars that's coming, because you have learned the hardest way that being always the first is not something that should be celebrated, because you can be the first woman in the boardroom, you can be the first black woman wherever, but at the end of the day, you cannot make any meaningful, transformative decisions, because in that boardroom, each and every minute, everything will be reduced to let's vote, and that's where you will see that it's unproductive, because you look like a fool. They will say let's vote, and then it's only you who's raising your hand. And then you begin to realize that the more we are in this space, the better. So those were some of the lessons. But also, on the geopolitics of knowledge is the realization that the knowledges that are considered to be dominant, the knowledges that are considered, to be superior, are knowledges that are located at a particular geopolitical space, and they are predominantly white men. That's why in my own discipline of training in sociology, we have fathers of sociology. I'm yet to hear about mothers of sociology within the space, but also these are men located in Europe or the global north, and theorizing from the experiences that are completely different from what we know and from what we understand. And when women, and black women in particular, come to theorize from the margins of society, come to theorize from the global south, from the everyday lived experiences, that for the longest time has been considered as raw data that is to be taken and been analyzed, by other people. But what does it mean then to theorize from your own location? What does it mean to theorize, from your own people? Because for all we know is there is no amount of theorization that can supersede an everyday lived experience. So what does it mean to theorize from a space of being a black woman. So the work that I'm trying to do now and very conscious about as I undertake the journey in the academia, but also reflecting back from the picket line during FISMA's fall, is to say there is an urgent need to dislocate, to demasculinize, and to degender knowledges, which is to say, I'm so very particular about teaching black women. I'm so very particular about citing black women. And I make it, even a political project to say, these are the knowledges that have mattered for the longest time ever. And if you read this work, you'll find that sometimes even those recognized male scholars, they take black women's work and present it as theirs without necessarily giving credit and all of that. So it becomes very important for me. So I'm just interested in a small quote from Anand Singh in her book published in 1993, In the Realm of the Diamond Queen, Marginality in and Out of the Way Place. So she draws from her own work from the Meratas gender constructions in Indonesia, and she warns against the easy assumptions that, and I quote, "Women everywhere are the same. The women's speech reveal a woman's point of view, that women always speak from a gender identity of women." She stresses the necessity of investigating the forms of power and discourses that are framed by the exclusions of oppositions of gender. And she argues that these then become the starting point for discussing both femaleness and the agency of any women. So what Ting does here, then she cautions us of this understanding of the assumption that women's experiences are the same, that womanhood is homogeneous. And I think that's what has motivated for some of my work to really conceptualize from feminisms instead of feminism, because of the understanding of this diversity, to say, I cannot stand here and speak about the experiences of the LGBTQAI plus community when there is someone who belongs to that community here, and hence the politics of passing on the mic. But also, what does it mean in terms of leadership to find a voice and make sure that people represent their own experiences? It becomes key as a moment of reflection from the picket line, and to reflect in my own teaching, supervision, and research. Also, Zanele Moholi, from her own work on lesbian rape, published in 2004, she writes about the issue of textual violence, and this forces us to interrogate our methodologies as we research our communities. I always write about ethnographies and the understanding of how invasive ethnographies are, but what is important for me is that from Zanele Moholi's work is how she brings out the issue of textual violence, to say, we go to these communities, we do the research, and then we come back, and then we choose and select what we want to present as data and how we want to analyze it. So for me, I think the ethnographic work was easy to divorce from emotions, from the anthropologists who were coming from the global north to research the people in our communities. But what it means, what does it mean today, as a black scholar, researching your own people, researching your own community, because some of these struggles are shared. How do we write from a FISMA's fall moment? How do we make sure that we correct that history? And I think one of the books that was referred to when Ubat Miller was doing my biography had to do with that realization, to say, how do we capture the FISMA's fall struggle in the moment in ways that we tell the stories from our own lived experiences? And as a result, that book is not a heavily academic book. We had to choose whether we forego the whole processes of the academic books for the benefit of different people, even those who were not academics in themselves, to tell their stories, and how far we could, erase their voices or silence their voices as they tried to speak. That was also important for me. But also with that, also as we reflect in teaching and doing research within the academy, also in Tabiseng Mtsime's work, I think when I was writing my PhD, I struggled with I struggled a lot with some of the stories of women that I was writing about, and then I went to her. I think during that time, she was at the NIHSS as one of the mentors. And this is some of the women that I met during the struggle during Fees Must Fall, and then they came to carry me. But the work around the dismembering and remembering of the women's bodies as we tell their stories, because for all we know, in everyday experiences, in their everyday lives, women are constantly dismembered. So what does it mean to remember now their stories when they dig deep into their past, when we go out to do research on violence, research on rape, research on some of the most brutal things that have happened in their life? What I realize is that when we begin to do that, we take them back to the crime scene, quote unquote. We take them back to the moment of that violent encounter or traumatic event that they experienced, and we are forcing them to re-piece together those memories and to put up a story that is appealing to us. And I think fragmented narrative has been one of the most useful methodologies for me, but drawing from Tabiseng Mtsime's work on silences of women at the TRC, where from a work on the mute always speak. What does it mean when we go out to do research? What does it mean when someone comes to me to ask me about the Fees Must Fall protests as a form of research? What does it mean to recollect those memories and make a story? But also there is an acknowledgement of the lack of linearity in terms of the retelling of the events. Then fragmented narrative then becomes useful in terms of assembling these stories, but also how do we then give back, or how do we reparate, the harm that we do to women? Because for the longest time, the women have been perceived as strong people. What do we mean when we say women are strong? Yet they have to tell us these stories and all of that. And that's one thing that when a student of mine comes to start their research journey, and then they say, I'm researching rape, I'm researching township violence, I'm researching this, I ask these questions because these are some of the questions that we are supposed to reflect on, but also not only to the not only for the participants. I think when I was applying for my ethics, for my PhD, I failed that ethics 3 times. I kept on writing back, and then it kept on coming, because some of the questions that were coming were around, you will be researching apartheid violence. How are you going to make sure that these people that you are asking are okay after that? And the ethics committee at Wits wouldn't understand, because I'd done the fieldwork before for my master's. So when I came to say, there are so many stories that I carry that after the narration of the story, the person who was telling me the story says, for the past 27 years, I've never slept, because I've never told anyone this story. It has been haunting me. Now today that I've told the story to you, I'm going to sleep for the first time. So this forced me to interrogate some of the knowledges that we hold about what is therapy to black people, what is therapy to black women, because we think we can impose. For someone else to speaking to someone, it was very important in terms of reflecting on my methodology. But also, on the flip side of the coin, no one really cared about what that does to me as a black woman researcher, researching those stories and asking questions around stories, because we're so preoccupied about the academic journey and then the next person and all of that. At the same time, we forget. So during that time, I realized that I was carrying so much baggage from the movement itself. It was a reflection moment to say, 5 years after, because I did my research just after the next phase of the Fismas Fall protests of 2016, I was going on to fieldwork. I realized that I was carrying so much trauma from the fieldwork itself, and I had never had a moment, to talk about this trauma and how, when I encounter stories that are similar, what are the lessons that I can draw from there? What are the similarities? What are the parallels? That became very important for me. But in closing, we do need to interrogate our methodologies, and I think a lot of them, some have already touched, but what was outstanding for me also, both during FISMA's fall and in my academic journey, is the question of consent. Because we assume that consent is just a once-off thing, that people sign off and then it's gone and then you can carry on, doing the work. But FISMA's fall in particular, being a student activist on the picket line, taught me that actually consent, number one, is negotiated. But for women, and for black women in particular, when you consent using your own agency, you unconsciously consent on behalf of your community, on behalf of your family, on behalf of everyone who knows you, while you are using your own agency, because you are going to be held responsible for things that you choose to say and choose not to say. So one of the lessons was from the incident that I cited before on taking off my top during FISMA's fall on the 4th of October in 2016. While I did that consciously with my consent and everything, when I got home, I had to be held accountable, for putting the community at risk. What did you think you were doing? How do you expose your body in front of international media and all of that? But also when I started, when I started documenting the stories of trauma, the stories of violence of women that I was working with during my research, after writing these stories, I had a moment of reflection from the picket line to read their stories. I realized that, and just short after that, it was just after Uyinene Mkhwetjana's murder and all of that, and then there was this ongoing thing of naming and shaming, and someone wrote anonymously on social media about an incident, and then after that they were tracked. This happens constantly with women, whether it's rape or it's any form of violence, that when you narrate the story, even without putting the name, the family where it happens, they know. The community, they know about it. So it would look like you are consenting unconsciously on behalf of them, because then you will be held, liable. You will be held responsible to say, how dare do you tell this story? We agreed that this is, a family secret. Why are you putting it out there? So these are some of the things that we really need to interrogate in our everyday activism, but also in our everyday, academic journeys within the higher education, the work that we're doing in the communities and the work that we're doing in the academy, where it meets, how do we then mediate some of the different forms of violence, that women constantly face, because in their everyday, they're constantly dismembered, whether literally or figuratively. So in closing, do cite black women's work. It's very important. There are important lessons that we learn from the do teach black women, for those who have an opportunity to teach. Even if you're a tutor, recommend black women's work to your students to understand from a different perspective. And in closing, to those who are supervising, please do supervise with kindness, do supervise from a space of love. It is a really tough journey, and many students have been broken by harsh supervision. It does not necessarily mean that when you then supervise with kindness, you are bound to produce work that is not quality, because people are more comfortable when they feel like they are seen, they are cared, and they can perform to their, maximum ability. So those are some of the things that, looking back from the picket line, I've learned some acts of love, acts of kindness, and the fact that the higher education system in itself is violent. So it is important that we exercise kindness in our everyday. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Ndlovu. That was quite a mouthful, and I'm sure we are all itching to engage you on your presentation. However, I am going to introduce Ms. Shatadi, who is our second speaker for the day. Shatadi Phoshoko has completed her qualification in Bachelor of Laws and serves as the current and first female Secretary General of Unisa National Student Representative Council. She is also the Secretary General of Unisa Law Students Association and is the founder and chairperson of Kasivisa Advocates NPO. Shatadi has authored and published articles on different platforms, including an academic co-authored paper titled Decolonization of the Law Curriculum Through the Prism of a Lived Experience, which is published with Pretoria University Law Press, and a recent article published on the Unisa platform titled An Examination of the Violation of Human Rights on Social Media. She has represented the university on different platforms, including the South African Law Deans Association Conference, Parliamentary Portfolio Committees of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, and 16th Conference of South African Chapter of International Women Association of Women Judges, amongst others. Through her roles in the SRC, Shatadi also sits on different committees and boards such as Unisa Council and college boards. She holds core interests in research and human rights activism. Help me welcome Ms. Shatadi to the podium.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if I'm audible. Thank you so much, Program Director. Let me firstly extend my greetings to the attendees, fellow students, the organizers of the program, and also my fellow panel member, Dr. Hlengiwe Ndlovu, acting ED, Prof. Grace Kuno, and also Ms. Badumisile Hlongwane. And I want to thank the organizers for the invitation to this very critical program. And Dr. Hlengiwe Ndlovu actually was speaking about how the whole thing of being the first is not really something that we should be celebrating. And I want to know, to say at this juncture that I'm the first Secretary General of the NSRC. And I don't say it as a celebration, but also because it informs my entire experiences in the leadership position that I hold as a Secretary General, because it's a position that is predominantly reserved for men, and therefore my entire experience in that position, is then informed by the fact that I'm occupying it for the first time. A woman has never occupied it, and therefore my leadership will be constantly doubted simply because I am a woman. And also, women in politics are usually not given positions that have a sort of influence, if I can put it that way. We are usually reserved for deputies, and if you are lucky enough, you can be a treasurer general or a treasurer. That is the highest position that you can actually get in politics as a woman. It is not because women are not capable or because women are not contesting enough, but because the space is generally anti-women, and the space is very violent towards women, not just physically, but you can't mobilize, you can't lobby people simply because of you are a woman. And hence, female leaders are always embroiled in fights and attacks. It is usually because as a woman, you are generally not seen as a leader. And when you occupy a position of leadership or a position of influence, you are constantly doubted. People are always fighting you. But another critical thing is that when you occupy those positions, you are not expected to lead, but to be the face of that leadership position that you occupy. You must look beautiful, you must be all of these things, but a man must give you a mandate of what you must do. And when you dare take decisions, or when you dare have an opinion or question anything, you are then attacked and embroiled in fights. The structural system of power which governs the directions of the state is fundamentally white and male. And to express this differently, the ruling class which controls the strategic sectors of this economy, although it is white, it is also predominantly male. I give this reflection in my genesis of my presentation because this reality goes to dictate our realities as women. During Fees Must Fall, the students were calling for free education, but also a decolonized education. And as we understand decolonization, it is that it's tied to the three systems of domination, being racism, sexism, and also classism. Bell Hooks actually calls this or speaks of white supremacist capitalist patriarchy because these are intertwined and tied to each other. During Fees Must Fall, at its peak, I was not a student. I was watching all of the unfolding from a TV screen, and although I watched from a TV screen, experiencing women leaders leading from the front was affirming. And although there were challenges experienced, but seeing women in the picket lines was also very affirming for me. But I say this because in as much as these women today are not referenced a lot as compared to their counterparts, but it showed that women are capable leaders, but also there were equal participants in coming up with that ideological framework of what they want as part of their education. Beyond the facade of democracy and also the rich rhetoric of gender equality, the women in this country are still chained to the yoke of triple oppression. Consequently, the role of women in global ruling system of gender oppression is relegated to footnotes and as by the ways. And statistics show that women are still faces of poverty, faces of violence, and all these other structures that oppress us. And undoubtedly, that is a resultant of the patriarchy and capitalism systems that reinforce the domination of women. As a university student and as a female leader in this institution, one has made the bleak realization that being female and black, you need to work twice or sometimes thrice as hard as your male counterparts, who may not even be as low-skilled, talented, and capacitated as you are, just to get half the recognition, the benefits, and so forth that are apportioned to your male counterparts. To date, there are fewer women in permanent positions of academia. The number of men that are enrolling at universities are also dropping. And in addition, more women are completing their studies in undergraduate studies. And yet, these women struggle to make great inroads in getting into leadership positions anywhere, be it in academic institutions or even outside. Moreover, men are projected as universal tellers of the truth. They are authors of all the knowledge we consume, and the level of gatekeeping against women is also at its peak. In extension, universities are filled with systems of symbols of men in the form of building names, in the form of statues, and others. This culture of colonial and post-colonial symbolism completely displaces the idea of women as capable leaders of society. It locates and defines women as permanent followers. And with the above mentioned fragments, women continue to be subjected to the status of subordinate or are supplemented. Leadership theorized from a social construction perspective dictates the automatic and effortless elevation and acceptance of men into leadership positions favorable by society as opposed to women. A few months, many months actually ago, I was giving a talk somewhere where I think it was last year in August, and I asked Prof. Kuno if it is okay for me to speak about my experiences in leadership, and Prof, you said that it is okay because it humanizes the experience. And I want to give that reflection as a female leader, although I partially did that in my introduction, that there are challenges that you face as a woman that even women after us who are going to lead in, especially in student leadership, will continue to face. Number one is that you are constantly doubted, as I did mention. For me, as a Secretary General, part of my duty is to write statements, is to be the administrator of the structure that I occupy. And in this position, I was forever accused of having a ghostwriter. This is despite the fact that I was a published author or a co-author of an academic paper in 2019 before I joined politics or any position in the university. But simply because of the fact that I'm a woman, I was seen as incapable of producing any knowledge or producing any intellectual work, and therefore there was constant accusations that I do have a ghostwriter because I'm a woman. The second thing is also with regards to the erasure of our work, and Dr. Ndlovu spoke about this, that when you are a woman, your work will constantly be either erased or apportioned to someone else, even though you are the producer of that work. And this means that if I am a woman who has come up with some programs within the structures that I lead, it will never be seen as this is a product of my work, but it will always be seen as though there is a male who produced that work and I just either facilitated it or just carried it out. And the other thing is that women obtain their value in relation to men. This means that you are devalued if you do not have any relations to men, or if men are not supporting you, it means that your value then gets devalued. And another thing is also with regards to the fact that we are usually compared and seen as natural enemies as women. Hence, a lot of women who occupy positions of power or leadership seldom get along. It is not because naturally we are natural enemies, but simply because the system makes us to be as though we are natural enemies. We fight each other because we are constantly compared, not based on our work, but based on other things that have nothing to do with the work that we are supposed to be doing. The other thing is with regards to lack of support from older women. And when I say support, the support must not be motherhood, but we must relate to each other as leaders across all ages. I remember in 2021, I had it was not a fight, but it was a disagreement with a female leader within the university, because I said that when she speaks to my male counterparts, he speaks to them like leadership, their positions. But when it came to me, it was motherly. And that is not a problem. But the problem is that women, without realizing it, end up making us children as women leaders. But with the men, they give them that leadership that they deserve. And therefore, it becomes very difficult for me as a woman to relate to another woman who sees me as a child, but sees my male counterparts as equal leaders in the space. And lastly is with regards to being over-sexualized. We are constantly seen as sexual objects before being seen as leaders. And my contribution is will always be reduced to what I can offer sexually. When you enter boardrooms, when you enter meetings, and you have something to offer intellectually, ideologically, and otherwise, it is not taken into consideration, not because it's not sound, but simply because the expectation is that your contribution in the room should be to the pleasure of men or to what men want, and not necessarily to the ideological or the intellectual work that you're going to offer. Going forth, as I conclude, if we are to attempt to dismantle some of the structures that continue to relegate women, we need to be very deliberate about collaborating and also support amongst women. Young women who are female leaders, who are student leaders, never make it big in society, not because they lack the talent, but because of the lack of support from other women, whilst the system is already oppressive towards them. We also need to be very honest and have honest conversations about creating and sharing opportunities with young women. Because in a capitalist society, if I am not economically emancipated, I will always be a victim to violence and to all those other many things. I'm a huge critic of women empowerment events that happen where we just share our experiences, where we have venting sessions and all of those things, but there are no talks about opportunities. Because if I am not elevated and I'm not emancipated economically, it means that I will always be a victim. I will never be empowered, because true empowerment also comes through economic emancipation. especially in the capitalist society that we live in. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Dr. Ndlovu. I almost said Dr. Dlamini. I don't know what's with me and Dlamini today. To Dr. Ndlovu and Ms. Shatadi. The two presentations actually reminded me of one article that I read on transforming business. The article looked at the importance of having women in leadership. And in that article, they came down to 10 reasons why it is actually important to have women in leadership. Out of those 10 reasons, 2 stood out for me. The first one was that when women are in leadership, they tend to bring a unique transformational ideas to the front. That stood out for me basically because in this era that we are in right now, we speak more about transformation than anything else. So it actually reminded me, the presentations actually reminded me that each and every one of us are actually born with a certain trait or some kind of trait of leadership within us. But then the second reason that stood out for me is what actually it says women leaders can provide better mentorship. Then I go back to the fact that we are all born with a certain trait of leadership for us, but we need somebody that we can look up to, somebody that we can relate to, somebody that can help us nurture that skill that we have, that leadership skill that we have. And being a leader doesn't start only when you are in the workplace, but it starts at your very earliest age. But you need the right people to look up to. If I'm a woman, and I identify better with women. Sometimes you can be a man, but identify better with women. You need women in the kind of space that you are interested in that will help you to nurture that talent or that skill that you have. So thank you so much, Dr. Dlamini and Ms. Shatadi, for reminding me of that. And I'm sure that the colleagues in here were also reminded of the skills and the leadership traits that they have within them, and are actually eager to engage with the two of you. So I will open the floor now for comments and questions if you have any. Colleagues, we can go with the first round of hands. See, I'm even hoping that we have a second round. Okay, Prof. Kuno, you can go first.
I want to just firstly say thank you to both our speakers. I am inspired and I am hopeful from the contributions that you have made. You can even hear my voice is shaking. I'm hopeful that the work that we are doing is actually having an impact. A few questions. I'm not sure if there will be questions or comments. The first one is to Hlengi. The rebelliousness. I'm really fascinated by how women's rebelliousness gets them into trouble, but how it's a constant. It's a constant theme if you look at the contributions that women have made, especially black women, that rebelliousness is at the center of, or is the energy that drives a lot of women who actually make a lasting contribution, black women. So you spoke to, and thank you for also honestly speaking about your experiences. I'm really, fascinated by your analysis of the experience around the act of being rebellious, of being half naked in public, the decision that you made, your agency at the time, but how that led to other things, and your reading of that. I want you to speak more to that because I think it's an important contribution around how the things that stop us on our tracks, that we carry, whether we like it or not, we carry others with us, and how that impacts our ability to lead and make a contribution? And do men have similar experiences in terms of, carrying everyone with them? And how do we navigate that as women who want to make a contribution as agents that might not want to be attached to anyone at that moment? How do we do that? And I'm thinking sorry if I'm taking too long. I'm thinking also about, so as you were speaking, I was seeing the women of 1956. I have written an article. It will come out in the coming few days in one of the newspapers. And when I was thinking about this article, I was thinking about the women in my family, and I realized that there was one particular one. He was my father's mamngan, rebellious woman. She was there in 1956. She marched there. But what we don't see in the march is that what happens after. And that's what you are speaking. What happens after? And what happens after, from where I come from, is what I heard about her and how she was labeled in the family. But the act of challenging apartheid created so much for us. But what are the aftermaths for these women? What were the aftermaths? We never talk about them. And I think you've begun to talk about what happens after. We see these powerful women, we are inspired, like Shatadi was saying, by these women who were marching in the Feast Must Fall movement. But what we don't ask is what happened to them after, And I think that's an important question to think about. And then Shatadi, for you, also thank you for also sharing personal experiences. I think it's always courageous to do that, and it will get you in trouble, but it has to be done. So thank you for sharing that. You talk about the ghostwriting, how you are labeled as someone who has a ghostwriter. I want you to speak maybe to how that impacts your ability to write freely and honestly and with power. How does knowing that people think you have a ghostwriter impact your ability to thrive? And what are the things that you are doing to make sure that it does not derail you further than, I'm imagining that it has an impact, a negative one. But what are the kinds of things you are doing to make sure that it doesn't? And what are the struggles now after those kinds of comments? What are the new struggles? Because it does lead, having those kinds of criticisms does lead to struggles. What are those struggles and how are you navigating them?
Okay, thank you, Prof. Kuno. Do we have someone else with a burning contribution for the first round? Yes, lady. I'm sorry, I'm calling you lady. We'll just take that hand and then we'll give you guys the chance to respond.
Thank you. Mine is not a comment but a question to the Secretary General of SRC, Ms. Shatadi. Since it is the SRC election season now, are you supporting any woman go Unisa? I submit. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ndlovu, please start.
Okay, thank you for the questions and reflections. Prof, the aftermath. I've been actually sitting with a half paper on the aftermath of the movements, the aftermath of the protests, and that, because it is also very important that we reflect on that. And I didn't want to talk about that protest. I don't know how it came about, that 4 October protest. I was very clear about excluding it, but of course there were things that I had to draw from it. It comes at a cost. And I think when I was preparing for this presentation last night, I had to ask myself questions about if I was to write to a younger me, what is it that I can write? And last night, my response to myself was like, perhaps there was no me before Fees Must Fall. Not necessarily that there was no me, but maybe there is no younger me to write back to during that time. Because that's why I framed this conversation around the labor of love, wanting to see the best out of the picket line from all possible, like against all odds. Because that movement took a lot from me as a human being, as a student, but also as a young academic. And I consciously choose to take love from the movement and ignore everything that was taken away, because I've focused on building, on rebuilding from the Fees Must Fall, and also looking at how can I build and who is invested in helping me build. So if I'm to, after your question, if I'm to write to a younger me, I think I'm more wiser now and I'm more strategic in terms of my rebelliousness. And I've said this to some of the colleagues to say, do you know that radicalness doesn't pay bills? And I know it sounds so controversial, but you're wanting to disrupt the space, but the question is at what cost? Because I've seen those personal costs to me. Maybe you might be wondering, my department has advertised so many jobs, but I'm not even bothering to apply. Like, it's my home, I've been wanting to always come back and teach at my department, but I won't apply for any job there, because I know that in the process of building, there is so much damage that I did. And I call it damage, quote unquote, because we needed at some point to destroy so that we could rebuild. So during that time, I was a well-funded student from scholarship. I had scholarships that were funding my PhD. So it wasn't making sense, to people who knew I had funding. Why am I disrupting the space? Why am I asking questions about students who are sleeping at the postgraduate room? And the response was always, Hlengiwe, you are inciting violence, you are pushing other students, you are brewing a storm in a cup of tea where there are no crises, but there were a crisis that we're seeing as students. And my privilege of being funded through a scholarship did not excuse me from that, because I know my condition before that scholarship and what it means, that it could be me sleeping on the floor. But then to disrupt the space, it comes at a cost, because you are destabilizing the status quo, you are disturbing people who are comfortable in their own doing and all of that. And to refer back to my fellow panelists, this thing of then, I had to deal with that during that time. I wrote my PhD proposal alone. I had supervisors, but because there was a point to prove of the discussions that I didn't know about that were ongoing in the background related to I didn't write my master's. And this is a master's that I only came to learn after that period, after I defended my PhD proposal, that there was a debate around not writing my master's, and as a result, when I got the best award for that master's, I had to compete with people who took 2 or 3 years to do their master's when I did mine in 12 months, and then the debate was, she didn't do it, someone did it for her. And when I started hearing about that, it was so painful to say, I've put so much work, only for someone to say, you did not do the work. And I realized that it had nothing to do with actually doing or not doing the work. It had everything to do with the disruption that I did within the space during Fees Must Fall. I remember being called one day to this office that suspends people. I can't remember the name of the office. So I was called there, and I received an email, and then it was followed by a phone call, like, you are needed here, you have to come right away. I said, I have tutorials, I can't come. I can come after maybe tomorrow because I needed to prepare. I didn't know why I was being called. And then I got there, and then I saw that I was encouraging people to carry shamboks on campus. That was so weird because, I mean, women carried shamboks during Christmas Fall because it was violent and all of those things. So I had to raise questions of the ongoing violence that was happening and harassment against women that was happening within the space, and that was that went uncontrolled, unchecked, and all of that. And then carrying a shambok then becomes an issue that we're at the verge of being suspended. So I learned hard lessons during that moment, but also looking back, I think I'm grown up now. I think I know how to be strategic. Now I can safely say to new colleagues who are coming into the system, we will disrupt it, but not now. Serve your probation and finish. And then once you are in the system, once you are confirmed, then we can see what to do. In the meantime, we are yes bossing and just very slowly, you know, because, I mean, we are black, we need money and all of that, and rebelliousness doesn't pay bills. You get to be sidelined, you get to be excluded from things, from opportunities. I applied any opportunity that came after Christmas Fall, whether it is within my school or my department. I never got it for no good reasons that were put on the table, sometimes no responses and all of that, and I knew what was that all about. And that was the time when I needed the money the most, so I've learned. Now I know better. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I'm going to start with the questions. The question from Tiro at the back there, whether I am supporting any SRC woman. Of course, I'm supporting an SRC woman. I think one of the important work that we have to do, especially being the first to occupy certain positions, is that we must not be the first and then the last. It must always be that you are the first, but you created a space for another woman to actually come and occupy that particular position. So yes, I am definitely supporting not a woman, but a lot of women who are contesting. The second question was from Prof. Grace Kuno on how does me being accused of having a ghostwriter actually impact my writing going forward, how it impacted my writing going forward, but also how I'm able to thrive. I think, you know, now that we're having this honest conversations, at first there was the urge from my side to disassociate myself from the people that are being said that they are writing for me, so that I can continue doing the work, but I've disassociated myself from them so that people can see that even when I don't have relations with them, I can still produce that work that I was being accused. But that is not unhealthy. In fact, it is disruptive even to myself, because these are at most some of the progressive males that we have in the political spaces that continue to support our work, that are not as violent or have any negative impacts to us. So what I then did, and I think is the only way, is to rebel, because you don't have any other thing. You can't go around explaining to people, no matter how much you try, that I'm doing this work. And I think that at most it has nothing to do with the fact that people don't think that you can do it, because there was a proof that I have done this work before. I'm a published author before I even entered into politics. So you cannot argue that I even had a ghostwriter then, because I didn't even know the people that I'm accused of that they are writing for me at that particular time. But another thing is that if you can't rebel, then it means that you must go back to the cocoon and not leave. If you can't rebel, you're not going to be able to leave, especially as a woman who has a system that is totally against us. But I think the other thing is that representation matters, and that's why spaces like this are very important. and females who are writing about, or women who are writing about some of their experiences actually matters, because you get to know that you're not alone, that the experience you are having, every other woman is actually experiencing. When Dr. Ndlovu was just speaking now that her master's was doubted, that she didn't write her master's, those are some of the conversations that are important and that are affirming to us that your experience and other women are experiencing it, and that you're not doubted simply because of someone looks at you and thinks that when you speak you're not making sense, therefore there's no way you could have wrote a particular work. But it's simply because of your gender that informs that, simply because of some of the work that you have done, but also because there is a deliberate attempt to just discredit you as a female or as a woman. So it's not going to stop because you are trying to prove yourself, but it generally won't stop. So it is okay, it continues, but you continue to do the work. And what am I doing to thrive? I think the realization and the acceptance that the space needs us, and it needs us to continue doing what we do, to continue to actually have even more women coming into the spaces. I'm in student politics. Of course, my primary job is to make sure that we have more women that come into the space, that lead the space, so that it is no longer abnormal to see a woman writing, occupying a secretary general position and so forth, but that it becomes an entire norm, that women are actually leaders. It's not a contestation, it's not a can they lead or can they not. It's the fact that there are humans who can lead, but the system or we are socialized to not see them as capable leaders. I think I've answered the questions. Thank you.
Thank you to the two colleagues. We are streaming the seminar on YouTube, and there are a few comments that I would like to read for the two of you. The first comment is, it says, "Respect for Dr. Ndlovu. So proud of you, my sister. We cannot be told how to express our feelings and trauma. We are not them. I love the sincere explanation of what you went through when narrating and other people's stories. You spoke of so many women without realizing it." And to Shatadi, you spoke like a true leader. I really admire your strength and tenacity. You go, girl. Shatadi, the world is afraid of us because they are aware of the power we have. It's us who are not aware of how powerful we are. I like that. So thank you to the colleagues on YouTube for engaging the colleagues. I'll open for another round of questions and comments if the audience has. Okay. Maybe you can start next to you, Kuku. Okay. Then they'll come to you afterwards. Yeah, you can start there.
Thank you for the opportunity. Sorry, I wasn't fully listening, so I hope I won't be repeating some of what was said earlier. Dr. Ndlovu, you spoke, and I think you said you avoid to supervise male students. And I want to ask you, is that then not discrimination? Because remember, when we started coming into this space, we were mostly supervised by male figures. So do you not see that as being problematic at some point? And also, I wanted to ask, are you doing anything in your cultural space? Because we are black women and we come from families that believe that things should be done in certain ways. How do we then make sure that our voices are heard and we are not treated as our parents have been treated over the years? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, they will come to you then. She's just finishing that row.
Thank you. Mine is a follow-up question for Shatadi, since she's supporting a female candidate for SRC election. So, SG, you mentioned that being in a critical position and leadership as a woman you're always being criticized and you are seen very incapable of leading. What advice would you give the next candidate what occupying your position? Yeah, that's that. Thank you.
Morning. Okay, so I was saying that statistically, South Africa have more women than men, but it always puzzles me that why do we have so many vacant that are dominated by men? Are we capable of those positions, or do we find ourselves not knowing how to handle those positions? And I'll give the practical example of the current situation that we saw, that we women, we hardly even support each other. When you go to the social media and you find who are being against who, most women, they just pinpoint the physical appearance instead of listening or understanding the message that you are persuading or the message that you are saying to the public. When you get to the workplace, when you address your colleagues, instead of they understand you, they start to attach their emotions because you are a woman. The next question is that as much as we celebrate the power of, like every August, we celebrate the power of women and those who marched for us. But when we look back, we find the upcoming generation, more especially there's the 2000, when you look at the things that they are doing, then you ask yourself, is this what the old generation fought for? You listen to how they interview them. I was listening to this one, I think as, if I'm not mistaken, as Tando something. I think most of the 2000 didn't know her very well. She said that school is not for me. I understand that things, they change. We have the influencers, we have the academic, we have way too many things. But then when you have to address those who follow these influencers, it becomes a little bit challenging, and you ask yourself, are we going to have leaders who know how to reason? Are we going to have leaders who only know how to influence by the physical appearance? Last thing, on the social, I'm not sure I'll call it correctly, Dr. Hlongwane, social? Yes. I've read one of the Titi Dangarai book, The Nervous Condition. If you remember, where she said that I am happy about the death of my brother because I will have an opportunity to go and learn. Now, we look at the black society when they will send a boy to go to school so that he can come back and take care of the family, his family, and if he's married, he'll take care of those, and he also have to take care of his mother or anyone from back. But then we lack where we say that a man will come back from the tertiary and bring all the education to the whole community. So I'm saying is that we're still separating the women and men with their strength and knowledge, and we categorize or we label them to say, these are for women, these are for men. Another example is that we find women, even if they're academic or they have that position, they will have to step down because they have to nurture their children
while the men can go and explore the world. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. We'll leave it at that for now. Ms. Shatadi, you can go first, and then Dr. Ndlovu can come after you.
Okay, thank you. So I think the first question was asked on the advice that I have for young women. And I think I must just also give a reflection that when I came into the space, which was in, 2019, 2020 there, when I was still new in the political space, I found women who were not cold towards me, but rather that they were very welcoming, and that the positions that I occupy, both as a Secretary General in the Unisa Law Students Association and also in the SRC, I had women who were supporting me on the sidelines and making sure that I get those positions. And the woman who asked the question, Dimakat, is actually one of those women who supported me. And the advice to young women will be the fact that I think generally it's very important that we don't doubt that our capability as women, but rather that, and I think I mentioned this quite a lot, that it's not that you are incapable as a woman, but it's because the system does not want you to be capable. The system does not recognize you as a capable leader. So it has nothing to do with your capabilities, but rather just how we are socialized, and that women who get into those positions need to realize that be rebellious and not behave. There's a quote that says that well-behaved women rarely make history. And I think if you are going to be behaved, you will never succeed at anything. You must be very mischievous. Be naughty if you have to. If that's what it will be called. But if you're going to conform, you will never get anything right. It's okay to be controversial, to be spoken about, and all of those things. We have no control over those things. But what is important is that one needs to understand that that's what being a leader comes with. But when you are a female leader, it comes with more challenges, and you need to just embrace that. And the other thing is that it's very important that we find networks of women that you can always fall back to. I call these women on my contact list the helpline, that I can just call and say, I have this challenge. How do I go on about this this particular challenge? That is important, because to navigate the spaces as a woman in spaces that are very masculine, or that are not, or historically they were not occupied by women, it's very difficult. So when you have women that you can always lay back to, or that you can call and say, I have this challenge, that actually assists the work. And also that being smart also helps. So it's very important to read, so that you are, in informal languages we say that you can navigate dynamics. You must be able to see how to solve certain challenges, how to approach different challenges, because sometimes there is no manual that says this is how you do 1, 2, 3. You must have a strategic way of dealing with certain things. That's how, especially in political spaces, it's very important to have those skills. The other question was with regards to, are we capable of these positions? Of course we're capable. Leadership is not installed in a gender. Men are not born with the skills. The same way they're not born with the skills. A human is born with being a leader, not a gender. And I think that it's important that we do re-emphasize the fact that women are capable of this, and it shouldn't be a thing or a question to some extent, because then it sort of genderize leadership. It makes leadership to be something that is only associated with a particular gender, which is incorrect. I mean, the world is led by men generally, and we have an entire continent that is starving to death, and the world is led by men. Or countries in Africa are led by men. We have load shedding, the country is led by men. So, but also I agree with the comment to say that women don't support each other. That is correct. to some extent, because we exist in a system that is constantly pinning us against each other, that makes us to see each other as competitions. When I got into SRC, I experienced that a lot from females. And when I got into my position, the first thing that I was excited about was the fact that we had women that I can at least lean to, because we had certain similarities, and I felt like at least I have women that we can work together. But then as time progressed, I started realizing that that's not how things work. These women are not, I was fighting women than I was fighting men. And that was very sad, because you'd expect that it's women who are going to support me other than men. But that's how the structure is actually it's actually designed. It's not that the men were not fighting me, but they were even fighting me through the women that were supposed to support me. But it goes back to the point that we get our value from our association with men. These women are also disempowered women who feel that for them to work with men than to work with a female, it sort of just elevates them in society, and it brings them closer to opportunities than if they were to support me. On the issue of Thando, I did see the interview that you are speaking about. I think she's 16 years old. But I think it's also the responsibility of us, especially older women, to guide such young girls into the right direction. I don't think Thando is, at this point in time, an empowered woman, because she's still young and she exists in a space that idolizes certain media things, and then she gravitates towards those things. So I think that is the responsibility of older women to actually point such women into the right direction. But we must also not make the mistake of saying that as a woman you can only be one thing. It is okay that she wants to be an influencer, for example. There are many people who are making it in life as influencers and so forth. It must just not be to the detrimental of another human being or whatever, but women can be anything that they want to be. And I think that it's very important that we are deliberate about re-emphasizing that point, that if you want to be an influencer, if you want to be a musician, if you want to be whatever, as long as it's a position taken, as long as it's a decision taken from an empowered position, then that is okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that, SG. Women can be anything that they want to be, which is actually very true, because we've been raised through a system of lineages and lineages of, thinking that women and being socialized around women being less or being not capable. And I teach one of the group members from on the security cluster, and I'm always amazed by how men within the SANDF think that the physical being still provides security even today. So I asked them a question that every time we are told that men are the keepers, protectors of the, of the society and of that, and I asked them, who are you actually protecting women and children from? Who is busy outside here hovering and posing danger over women and children so much that we can be invested in saying men are protectors of the family? Protecting from who and from what? And I've never got any response to that question, because everyone who's afraid outside, 90%, 99%, they are afraid of men. Even other men are also afraid of other men outside there. So what does that tell us about, masculinities and toxic masculinities in particular? Because we are in all this trouble of gender-based violence and all of that because of the toxic masculinities that are also equally fragile. Because for the longest time, I asked them, who said men should earn more than women? Who said men should provide? Where is it coming from? And you'll see how much pressure that is putting on men and ending up, bruising their masculinities so much that then those masculinities become toxic. And then at the same time, on the flip side of the coin, we need protection from the very same. It's tragic for humanity, and we don't even know where we are headed to. Advice to young women, you can be anything that you want to be. Fight. And Professor Kuno, you asked about, the rebelliousness. And I forgot to say, no one is prepared to give up power just like that. You'll never get that. We've learned that even, from different histories in humanity, we fought from generation to generation for different things. But we must also learn to fight in a smart way, to choose our battlers, very strategically, because the everyday existence of a black woman is a state of resistance and a state of struggle. You always struggle. So if you chase each and everything, tomorrow someone says you have a ghostwriter, and then you need to attend to that, and you need to constantly prove yourself that, you deplete your energy, and then you lose the focus. So we choose our goals, our struggles strategically. Nervous conditions, Tsitsi. That's one of the most beautiful books that I've read. I opened my chapter 7 of my PhD with that quote. I was glad when my brother died, because I knew for the first time I was going to go to school. And on that whole chapter, I reflect on that quote, because it's one chapter where I felt it was necessary to silence men. I was writing about women's experiences in governance. And after reading all the interview narratives, I realized that actually patriarchy is the issue here. But during that week when I was also writing that chapter, a lot had happened. In Durban, this man was refusing to be divorced. He went to the school and fetched the kids, went to kill them. And then a boxer in East London was killed. Like, it was just chaos in South Africa. And then I think that at that point, that's where the phrase men are trash then emerged. And every time I call people to come and reflect on the phrase men are trash, what does it mean? Because if you remove it from the context, from East to East and all of that, it will remain meaningless. But if you bring it back to the context, what was happening? What was the cry all about? To say men are trash, and then you're like, no, but I'm about a boyfriend. No, but I love my kids. I've got daughters and all of that. What are you doing about Utabo, who catcalls girls, young children in front of you? What are you doing about that? When your friends at the bar are speaking, are being misogynistic about their colleagues who are women, what are you saying? What do you say to them? You listen, you watch, and then you think you are not trash. So that was a provocation to say, what are you doing to society? And unfortunately, that is a world that women have to survive in, and hence I'm saying you fight, but you fight very strategically, because you cannot afford to be a black woman, African, and be mediocre at the same time. The world will simply not allow you to. So you need to know how to work smart, but also, to make sure that you do not also carry the burden of constantly having to prove yourself in an environment that is actually, in a system that is actually not prepared to recognize women as, leaders in their own right. And hence, for the question that asked whether women are even capable of those roles, they are very capable, and they've been capable for the longest time ever. In our very recent history during COVID-19 pandemic, we literally put our lives on the hands of women, because we all, withdrew from the space. We stayed at home. We locked ourselves in. At the supermarkets, the cashiers were women. The nurses at the hospital, that care labor that continues unchecked carried so the societies across the globe during that time, and women are capable all the time. Whether women are constantly fighting, I wouldn't want to think through it like that per se, but I would look at the systemic violence that has been waged against women on one hand. On the other hand, the structural system where women have been socialized to learn that they are not good enough, to be told that they are always fighting against each other. And in most cases, you find women are put in these spaces of leadership. And because when we eventually see a woman occupying that space, our expectations grow. But also there are no resources that are allocated to that woman who's occupying that space. There is no support that is dedicated to that woman who's occupying that space, so much that they can deliver to our expectations. And our expectations are ridiculous because we then all of a sudden expect that that woman has occupied that space, and then over the night they can undo centuries and centuries of a Secretary General that has been occupied by men over the years. And when they fail to do that, or when they struggle with that, we then saying they hate women. When they can't give us what we want, we say they hate women. But there are also competing, priorities even in that position, even for you to survive first as a woman who's occupying that space, but also not having support, that comes your way. And you'll find that in those moments, then you are bound to fight with women because they are looking up to you so that you can change their lives overnight. But that's also, an unrealistic expectation. But I think Danai Gurira put it in a very beautiful way. There is this one video clip of her. I think she was accepting a prize after the Black Panther thingy, where she says we need to dispel the myth that women are always competing against each other. Because in my own academic journey, when I reflect, it's women who carried me, and I continue to stand on their shoulders. And I know what that means in a space where there are competing needs, but also there are actually less women in those positions than more. So sometimes I find people who will point to my mentors and say these are violent women, and it becomes so difficult to say no, but actually I don't think she's violent because that's their experience and all of that. But the world is demanding, and also because we carry so much trauma within ourselves as women, and Black women in particular, it becomes then difficult to really see who is supporting you and who's not. Even those who are in positions of power or occupying those strategic positions, they've got so much pressure on them, and we never come to ask or to check on them, how are you doing and all of that. And because they are fighting these constant battles and all of that, and they are constantly made to believe that they are not enough. So sometimes it's a reaction, to the internalized traumas and everyday violence that then you then project as someone who's unkind and all of this. But I think we need to interrogate these based on a broader, interrogation of the system that has made women in this space. I had a question around discrimination, whether I'm discriminating men. Discrimination. So this is my problem with concepts, because they get to be coined to analyze a particular, historical moment, to analyze particular power dynamics. And in fact, I do supervise men, but I always tell them that I don't supervise men. And the reason why I do that is because of my approach to supervision, my understanding of the PhD or the master's journey and what needs to be done. Because for the longest time in the academy, we've had this huge gap between the lecturer or the supervisor and the student. And I've been working towards, shortening that gap, so that at least we have a humanly relationship between us before we deal with work, so that when you're having challenges and all of that, you are free to tell me, and then sometimes we can reason together and see what is the turnaround strategy around the timelines, the deadlines that are ahead of us. That is important, but also looking at the conditions back home. Other people cannot afford to stay in the system to do a master's for 2-3 years because the situation at home just doesn't allow you to do that. So I try to bridge that gap. But because also I work in a space where we are a postgraduate school, but not necessarily a normal, ordinary postgraduate school. We're doing people who are already in the public service, in the public sector, who are already working, who are older and all of that. And I would imagine sometimes I'm reading your draft, and I don't want to type all that on email because I would have forgotten and all that. And it's 1 a.m. and then I'm doing a voice note. I'm like, you know you need to do this, to do this, to do this. Why? Before I even take that thing in, because it can take me about a week or two to read your draft. But you better be working on other gaps that I've identified. But I'm thinking of it at night, and then I want to make this voice note. And I would imagine in a society that where we are living, what does it mean then to do that to someone who's married with their wife and everything? But also to say I don't supervise men. I don't read it as a discrimination, even if I was refusing to supervise them deliberately. In order for you to discriminate men, you would have to go through centuries and centuries of disadvantaging them so much that you can move towards, you can bridge the gap. That's why when we talk about affirmative action, people believe that those who are at the front must come back. And when I do this with first-year students, I always say, imagine a 400 meters race. Someone is already standing at a 200 meters point. Someone is starting. When we are doing that, we are not saying those who are standing at a 200 meter point, we are not saying they must run back. We are saying they must stop there while those who are starting run towards them. And it will take centuries even to cover half of that distance because, not a lot of work is being done around actually, towards bridging that gap. And lastly, the role of culture in terms of, do I participate in any culture? Yes, I do. I'm Xhosa, so we do have some of our cultures. And recently, I think in 2021, my sister was taking her boy for initiation. And I stand there as one of the mothers to the boy. And while he's gone there are rituals and practices that are performed in the Xhosa culture. And I've never seen them oppressive because the Xhosa culture, when it sends the boys to the mountain and says they come back as men, they are told even there to say you are a man does not necessarily translate that you disrespect, you treat people with indignity and all of those things. But it speaks to particular forms of culture, and I don't like it when then people turn that and then as a form of abuse or as a form of oppressing other people, because the culture in itself is not oppressive. And it is the same way as how we usually speak about women who wear the burqa, who are Muslims. I don't think we've given us time to understand why are they doing that. I think we are rushed to think that from our own perspective they're being oppressed and all that. It's the similar way with thinking through about women who are in polygamous relationships. I don't think we've ever really given them an opportunity to explain, or even, although they don't owe us an explanation anyway, but to share maybe their experiences and their understanding of that setup. I think our default position is that you are being oppressed and all of that. And I think we should interrogate these different cultures and make sure that people do not take advantage of the culture in order to oppress other people, in order to oppress women in particular, and all of that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hlengiwe and Ms. Shatadi. I think we have engaged enough, unless if someone has something really, really, really pressing that they can't hold, that they will die if they don't say.
Are you going to die?
Yeah, so maybe I can just say it for the benefit of everyone.
Everyone,
and then
yeah.
we can have a one-on-one. I really liked the methodology, on methodology comment that you made, Hlengiwe. And I like it because I like it because it raises important questions around decolonizing research. But I think some of the things you said also, and I think we were talking about something similar, but the day before yesterday, questions around ethics committees and how ethics committees actually create or are a barrier to decolonizing knowledge. And you spoke in length, and I just wanted to highlight that. But we will have a one-on-one. I wanted to highlight that how we think about what is knowledge and how we create knowledge or record knowledge matters for whether we are able to decolonize knowledge or not, but also most importantly, how universities structure how that process happens through ethics committees also contributes towards whether we are successful in decolonizing or not. So I wanted to just thank you for that. I want Shatadi to say something. Sorry, can I? And I think this question comes up a lot more. I think a few colleagues asked the question and you spoke to it, but I want you to speak to it because you are in the SRC and you play an important role and you spoke to this. You talked about the importance of collaboration. I want you to speak to how do we collaborate in a highly competitive space as women? And how do we collaborate when we are the first? And there are so many myths around being the first.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Just because I've given you an opportunity, I feel it would be unfair not to ask if anyone has something else that they would like to engage the two colleagues on. Is there someone going once, twice, 3 times a lady? Gone. Okay, you can go.
Sure. How do we collaborate in highly competitive spaces? Prof, I'm not sure how to answer that, but I can just give my thoughts on how personally I would want to see that collaboration sort of happening. Number one is that it should be an intergenerational thing. Women, older women, younger women coming together for a common cause, despite our class or whatever that sort of will ordinarily divide us, and working together. But that collaboration must also mean that you support me and I support you in whatever work that you are doing. And I think that, like you correctly mentioned, it's a very highly competitive space. It's like, the table is very small for all of us to enter there. But I think that to understand that we have common cause and supporting each other, that's what is more important. I'm sorry, I know that I didn't answer you correctly, but yeah, I'm still gathering my thoughts around that. Thanks.
Thank you, Shatadi. Thank you, everyone. We have come to the end of our program. But before we officially close, I would like to invite Hlengiwe to do the closing for us. And may she please come to the podium because she also has to hand over our tokens of appreciations. Thank you. That's what we call collaboration.
To our guests, thank you very much, but also to our participants, the audience, the technical team. Thank you very much for everything that you've done to make this a successful event. But also, You can see I'm an oldish woman. So I've gone through a lot. And when you spoke about you being in SRC, some of us were in women's leadership as students at Wits. Your experiences are exactly the same. And that was how many years ago, before I reveal my age? Yeah. Before students could, black students could stay on campus. Then you know how many years ago. We used to stay at Baragwanath. We used to have a bus that would ferry us into campus and out. No black students could stay on campus at Wits. So you can, I'm just trying to say, we all have our own struggles and challenges that we face at every generation. And at each generation needs to find a way of improving on what they are faced with, so that the next generation will have their own battles and pave the way for the others who are coming after you. And as a lecturer at Wits, as a student who has been at Wits, I have been a student at Wits, I've been a student at Unisa. We couldn't have been in this room during that time as students at Unisa. We all had to walk up this mountain. That's why this place, for those who are from that era, is called Kotabe. It was this building that was lily white. We could only go to the library and use a certain portion of the library, the lowest part of the library, because the rest had to be white. For the cafeteria, for us to access the cafeteria as students, I remember that the Department of African Languages, because it was the only department that had black staff, they had to have a relationship with the staff members who had some of the white lecturers buying for them in the cafeteria. This is the history of the university that we never talk about. And in all that, as women, we had to bear the brunt of being women, because then, I mean, really having to walk up this mountain on a daily basis, carrying your books, and a bus that is half empty of white stuff passing you by in the morning and in the afternoon. So you had to find ways of coming up this mountain, find ways of making sure that you leave early enough. For those who use public transport, they had to find a way of making sure that they get to the taxis before our parents get out of their offices, because otherwise, alisana space. But the buses were full of white people. White ladies were there sitting in the buses, coming up together with the professors. The white ladies were secretaries, most of them. They were not professors. Very few of them were academics. So that discrepancy, that discrimination is something that we needn't forget as students, but also as leaders, to say there is a history that we come from, and we need to always reflect. And as a parent, I have to come to this one. You mentioned fees must fall. I mean, I had 2 sons at UCT at the time. On the mornings, they would brief me. I'm very open with my son. They tell me everything. They said, "Mom, we are going to invade Parliament." I said, "Good. It's your struggle. Continue with it, but be safe." And it so happened that one of them was in the forefront. He's one of those who are always appearing on TV, kicking the policemen. And you can imagine what happens to you as a mother, as a woman. Here you get to the news, and when you get home, you see your son is kicking the police, the others are arrested. You then have to be there to give comfort to the family, but also to make sure that you call him and say, "Hey, Mfanak, please, you know, because you have gone through that as a student before. And I'm trying to say to you, each generation has an agenda they have to set for themselves. And you are allowed to be different as a woman, as a girl, as a mother. We can't all be the same. But whatever you do it with your utmost, with your heart in it, and not because somebody else is doing it. So I'm really happy that we sort of are coming back to say, where are we coming from? What are we leaving behind? What are we bringing to the fore for the generation that is coming after us? There will be a new SRC. I think they will learn from you. And we also have to learn to share ideas. You don't have to be coerced to ask for help, but you need to feel that I need help. I always say, we talk about mentorship. Don't make it formal. I need to feel I need help. I need somebody to mentor me. I need a supervisor that will talk to me. Because if it's formalized, it loses the essence. I believe in Botho. Botho must guide all that we do. As a student, as a supervisor, as a mother, as any leader in society, your humanity must libitang, where you say you have this, this is wrong. This is right, and you must listen to that voice. Sometimes we don't listen to that voice. We listen to the noise outside. Listen to the voice inside of you. As a woman, listen to that voice that will guide you. The voice that will say, am I doing the right? Am I supporting others? Am I making others comfortable around me? Am I making sure that tomorrow, when I'm no longer there, I've left a legacy that said, that person took care of us, that person mentored us, that person supported us. As a supervisor, I know you're going through that. As a student leader, I know you're going through that, but let it not end up here. Let's share, and to all of us who are in here, whoever you're touching, make them feel that they are human. Let's share humanity more than anything else. Thank you. Are they the same? Okay. To our guests, I know that you have to go and declare somewhere. As a token of appreciation, Dr. Ndlovu, thank you very much. Thank you. To the leader of the students, thank you for sharing your ideas. And please make sure that you share your ideas even to other audiences. Let it not be the last time that we hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. We've come to the end of our session for today. Thank you so much for being engaging and respectfully so. So that is appreciated. Ms. Ngomane has asked that I remind you to please sign the register if you haven't. And ngokwesiZulu ke angikwazi ukunihambisa emakhaya ningaphuzanga amanzi. So we will break bread outside, colleagues. Thank you.